All right, good morning. It's so good to see y'all. This is the last actual day of class that I'm going to teach y'all anything. Isn't that great? I'm not going to teach y'all anything after this, unless you have me for 387. I saw some of your wonderful faces over the last 2 days for the All DAG Business Plan competition. It was great to see y'all. It turned out to be a great competition. Teresa Welburn did a fantastic job at the last minute when all of this started to happen and she had to switch it to a virtual event. And it worked out really well. I thank you for being flexible with me. I had it in my calendar as Wednesday and Thursday. But for summer, I don't even know why I did that because it was actually on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I appreciate y'all being flexible with me once I realized that I had screwed up, and for being here with me today so we can talk a little bit more about financials. I'll cover a couple of little housekeeping things. So we will go through, and I'm going to talk to you guys about financial statements today. But on Tuesday, your assignment is due, and I think you've all probably seen the Excel spreadsheet that you're going to do. It's a gimme, and you're welcome. It should be easy. If y'all get this wrong, I'm going to be so sad because it's such a gimme. So you've got your assignment that is due Tuesday. You're also going to have an exam on Tuesday, and that's your the final regular test for the semester. And it's going to be on all the financial statements. You guys have access on the website, ginasimpson.online, to all of the Zoom lectures, and we'll have a really good one today. You're going to have all the PowerPoints already are there that's got information in it. Read your book chapters. And then this evening, I'll post an exam review for you as well. So you'll look through all of that, and you'll have a test on Blackboard on Tuesday. But I'll send you an email with the password and all of that, just like you normally do for your exams, okay? So any questions about all of that so far? Okay, good. Wanted to let you know that I will have all of your grades input into Blackboard by next Wednesday night. So at some point on Wednesday night, I'll finish up getting all the grades put in so that you guys can look at it on Thursday and you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to take your grade that you actually have earned in the class, or if you want to take a pass-fail. And you need to let me know by next Friday which one that you decide to do. If you decide to take a pass-fail, once you decide that, you can't go back. I don't know why they decided that. I guess to save us teachers from y'all like going back and forth all the time. Once you decide, you can't go back. But like I said, I'll have all of your grades in there next Wednesday night to let you know for sure. The only people who might be missing a grade is if someone has missed an exam. Remember, I give you 4 exams throughout the semester. You have 3 during the regular semester, and there's a final exam. With that being said, I only count your top 3 scores. So if you have taken all 3 exams, by next Wednesday night, you can have a possible final grade for the class. If you have not taken all 3 exams, then you will need to take the final exam. So you might not know your final score. That would be the only way. So that also means, and I've told you guys this a few times through the semester, that means that the final exam is optional for you if you have taken all 3 exams. And if you have taken all 3 exams, you can use the final exam to help your grade, but it cannot hurt you. And the reason it can't hurt you is because I count your top 3 test scores. So if you've taken all 3 exams and then you come in and you take the final exam and you make higher on it than one of your previous tests, then we'll drop the lowest test score and your final will count and it will bring your grade in the class up. But if you've taken all 3 exams and you come take the final and you make lower on the final than your previous 3 exams, then we just drop the final. So it can't hurt your grade. Does that make sense for everyone? Good. Okay. And the final will be comprehensive. So 3 more grades, possibly outstanding, 2 for sure. You've got your Excel, the financial statement, and a lot of you have already turned it in. You've got that. You've got exam 3, and then I'll input your participation grade too. We'll have that. And then possibly if you want to take the final exam, that'll be out there. Okay? Clear as mud for everybody?
I
Everybody's
just have a
like
quick
off
question.
video today. Don't you wonder what they're looking like?
I was just wondering if we opt in for pass or fail,
Mhm.
will we do that through you or Blackboard?
I think you tell me.
Right.
And I know y'all got an email that said what to do, and I need to go back and read that. What I'm going to do for everyone, and I'll put this in an email and send it to you all, is I'm going to assume you're going to take the grade that you earned in class unless you contact me next Thursday or Friday and say, I won't pass fail. So you have to tell me if you won't pass fail. If not, I default to the grade, the normal grade. But I think you tell me. I'm the one that inputs your grade. You have to tell me. Good question. Anything else? No? Everybody's still good? Still healthy? Yeah? Okay, Noah, so I'm dying. You've had the COVID test. How'd it go, bud?
Good. No
Yeah.
COVID.
No COVID. All right.
Yeah, I got tested for SARS and they tested me for COVID twice because the first one kind of came back inconclusive, but I'm good.
Oh, it's just Ebola. Good.
No, just the
That was a
swine
joke.
flu. I'm cool.
That was the swine flu. You're fast. I like it. That's awesome. Good. Okay. Well, good. I'm glad everybody's doing great. Let me make sure I have covered everything I want to. Okay, awesome. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to go through and do a pretty detailed lecture about the financial statements. You guys are welcome to stay tuned in and listen as I go, and then chime in with questions if you have them, or if you want to go back and watch the Zoom video later. I'm going to record it and I'm going to post it on the website just like I have all the others. That's up to you. But I'm going to go through today and talk you through all the financial statements and the houses and the characters and how they all interplay, and help put this into a better or easier format to understand for you. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to do a share screen and I'm going to write on the whiteboard for you. I'll save that whiteboard and I'll post it too. So hopefully you will have as many resources as you need to do well on the test. Everybody good with that? Okay. So what that means is this is probably my least favorite lecture of the whole year. And the reason for that is because it's about financial statements. But I also know that financial statements are important because they're your story. And you've got to be able to read your story. Not only do you want to be able to read your story, you also want to write your own story. You don't want your story to be written by other people or circumstances that you can't control. So we're going to talk today about the financial statements in an easier format and hopefully help you understand better why they're important. Now, I'll tell you this, 90% of the people out there cannot pick up financial statements and read the story. They just can't. And it's not always the most fun thing to learn. I get that. I mean, I'm in that population too. But I do know that the 10% of people who can read financial statements have an unbelievable advantage over everyone else. Whether you're starting your own company and you need to write your story and then you need to read your story, or if you're working for someone else, or even living the way we are in the pandemic right now, if you can understand financial statements, then you'll get the bigger picture and why decisions are made, and you in turn can make better decisions. And so I'll talk about that and help put it in perspective for you as I go through and talk about the financial statements. Now, one caveat that I want to throw out there for you is, remember, this class is like a 50,000 foot level. So I tell you a little bit about a lot. Understand that what we're going to do today is talk about the basics of financial statements. If you're an accounting major, you're going to know that a lot more detail goes into these. But for the most part, I'm going to teach you the things that you need to look at and the things you need to understand and the things that you need to read. to be able to tell your story. So, Kyle, aren't you an accounting major? No, you just understand them? Because you asked a good question. I remember one of your emails.
I had to take 2 courses.
Okay. All right. So over time, there is more detail that goes into the financial statements, but this is the gist of it. Okay. Y'all ready to take off? Okay, good. What I'm going to do is share a screen with you all and let me know. Can you guys see the whiteboard? Y'all see me right? Y'all see that? Y'all see that?
No.
Okay. Make sure, because there's a couple that can show up. All right. Can you see it now? Yay. All right. Let's erase and start. This is like the coolest invention. I could just play. Okay. All right. I'm like a kid, y'all. A complete kid. In these days of the pandemic and quarantine, I'm humoring myself any crazy way I can. All right. So like I said, you guys are welcome to hang in and listen as we go and talk about the story, or refer back to the Zoom video, but I would suggest that you all watch it because there will be some test questions that revolve around understanding this and the basis of how things interact, okay? All right, so let's jump in. Remember, if you've looked at your PowerPoints and you've read, then you know that there are certain financial statements, and we're going to talk about them as houses. And there are certain characters who live in each house, and they stay in their house. There are a couple of the characters who interact, but for the most part, they all stay in their own house. And so y'all know also that I can't draw very well if y'all seen this. And so the first house that we will talk about here is the startup costs. Look at that, that's terrible. I have to even erase that because that's so bad. Okay, let's do this. House number 1, and this is startup costs. If you look at the PowerPoints that I've given you, I've told you about startup costs, and I've given you a template and a sample startup cost to let you know some of the things that go in there. And understand that on this form, this is everything that you have to spend money for prior to opening your business. So think about this as a timeline, this line here, and this is when you actually open. Now, some of the things that you may have to spend money on prior to opening are you're probably going to have to spend some money on some type of construction. Now, that construction can consist of maybe you're going to be in a brick and mortar store and you needed to do some build out inside the store, or maybe it's website construction. Maybe it is building out an app. All the things that you have to have done before you can actually open. So maybe we're paying, like I said, for app development, lots of different things that we could be paying for. We also probably are going to have to pay some payroll before we open, because we have to hire employees and we have to bring them in and train them before we actually open. They need to be ready to go on day 1. We have to pay some rent before we open. Maybe we have to pay some fees for licenses and legal fees, accounting fees. There's lots of different things that we could have to pay for prior to opening the doors. And everything that we pay for, we get a total there, and this is going to be our total startup costs. Now, these numbers will translate later into the other financial statements, but it's really important that you have a very good understanding of everything that you have to pay for prior to opening the doors. Because if you're going to have to go to try to raise money, you got to know how much to ask for. Got to know. And when it comes to running a successful business, you have to manage your money. So any questions about startup costs? It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, it's just everything you pay for prior to opening the door. Everybody go with that? Y'all can do thumbs up or whatever. Okay, good. All right. So what I want to do is jump in and I want to talk about the other 3 houses. When we talk about financial statements, you'll hear me say it over and over again. It is like, it's a story. And not only do you want to be able to write the story yourself, you need to be able to read the story. And if the story's not going the way you want, you need to be able to make adjustments in there so that you can correct the story and make it the way that you want it to be. When we start looking at these, we're going to look at the first one. The first house we'll look at here. Let's look at your income statement. Now remember, this may be the income statement house, but they have nicknames. A nickname for the income statement is, some people call it the P&L, or profit and loss. Same thing, same thing. And the first character who lives in the income statement is gross sales. Your gross sales are your total number of sales that you do for any time period. And an income statement's run by a time period. It may be a month. You may want to look at the month of January, the month of February. Maybe you want to look at a week. Some people, if they have too much time on their hands, look from day to day, but it covers a specific time period. So we have gross sales. The next character that shows up here is one that you've seen, is your cost of goods sold. Your cost of goods sold's got some nicknames. Your cost of goods sold's also known as, maybe another nickname is variable costs. And we'll talk about exactly what cost of goods sold are in just a second. Gross sales minus your cost of goods sold gives you gross profit. Now there's that P&L, profit. So let's just pretend like we're going to sell rocking chairs. We go to Home Depot and we buy $300 worth of wood, nails, and stain so that we can build rocking chairs. And we're going to sell those rocking chairs for $50 each. So our retail price is $50. That's what somebody pays. Now we bought $300 worth of inventory, but $300 is not our cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is the price it takes for one unit. So if we said it costs, our unit, our cost of goods sold was really $25, what that means is it costs me $25 to build one rocking chair, one. So if I spent $300 and it cost me $25 to build one, then I have enough in inventory to build 12. 300 divided by 25 is 12. Everybody follow me on that? Making sense? And inventory goes somewhere else. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so cost of goods sold is 25. On the income statement, you don't record a number here until you actually make a sale. So let's say we built 12 rocking chairs. They're sitting out here on the front porch and people are driving by and somebody stops and buys one. Our gross sales at this time is $50. How much did it cost to build that one rocking chair? $25. So we subtract out 25, and at this point, our gross profit is $25. But if they decided they wanted to buy 4 rocking chairs, what would our gross sales be if we sold 4 rocking chairs? Y'all can talk. $200. $200, right? 50 times 4, if they bought 4, would have made it $200. What would our cost of goods sold be if we sold 4 rocking chairs?
100.
100. Thank you. 100. So that's the number that would show up, and our gross profit would be $100. So is everybody following me? A lot of people get mixed up and they'll say, well, I went to Home Depot and I spent $300. So they would put their cost of goods sold here. They'd put it as $300 and they'd say, man, I sold one rocking chair for $50, but I spent $300. So I'm negative profit right now. That's not a true statement. Not a true statement at all. And we'll talk about why as we keep going. So the reason that cost of goods sold has the nickname of variable cost is because the cost of goods sold varies based on how much you sell. So you see, if you sold one, it was only $25. But if you sold more, it went up to $100. So your cost of goods sold is always a reflection of how much you sell, not how much you have in inventory. And that is why it varies. Everybody with me? I can't see most of y'all, so I'm just gonna like go with it. Like, So for those of you who are on video, y'all nod at me just to give me like something to feed off of. I can't stand not being in class with y'all. It drives me crazy. Okay, I thought I was gonna do like a video lecture or something. I couldn't because I didn't have any interaction whatsoever, and I can't function like that. I can't. Okay, so here we are, gross profit. Gross profit's got a couple of nicknames too. Gross profit can also be known as our net sales. That's another nickname for it. Okay. And if you look at those PowerPoint, I think I gave you all the nicknames for everything. But now, this is not the end of it for the income statement. Now we have our gross profit, but now we have to subtract out some other things. And these are things that we pay, let's just say on a monthly basis. We're going to have to subtract out our rent. Maybe we're going to subtract out our utilities, our cost for insurance every month, our cost for marketing, payroll. That's always a big one. We subtract all of those out, and then we get a number at the bottom. If this number at the bottom is positive, it's profit. If the number down here is negative, that's a loss, which is why this is called a P&L, the profit and loss. And what we hope is that this gross profit number is always large enough to cover all of these expenses. That's what we want. Now, these expenses all have like several names. This can be known as, a lot of people, you'll hear them talk about overhead. That's what they're talking about, these numbers. Maybe you hear people talk about operating expenses. Same thing, just a nickname. Or some people talk about them as fixed expenses or fixed costs. All of that is talking about the same thing, just nicknames. The reason that they call these fixed costs is because these do not vary based on how much you do in sales. Your rent is the same every month, regardless of how much you sell. Utilities, that number might vary, but it's going to vary based on the temperature outside, not based on how much you sell. It all has to do with how much you sell. So everybody follow me on those? Good. Okay, so as we're looking at all of this, it's important to understand that you can look at one income statement and it'd be like, oh yeah, okay, well that looks good. That's got a profit at the bottom. But the truth is, you have no idea how good that income statement is unless you have something to compare it to. Which is the reason that we look at these on an ongoing basis. So we like to look at January, February, March, and we like to start plotting out a chart of like, oh, this is how we look. I like to look at January of this year as compared to January of last year. Did I do better in this January than I did last January? And we start looking at our story that way. True story, when we decided to open Vela City, our bike shop, the reason we decided to open it is because the local bike shop, Cycle Path, that was in operation was doing poorly. It was the only bike shop we had in town, but for some reason, they couldn't order inventory. They couldn't order any more apparel. They couldn't really do anything. And so the writing was on the walls. You could tell like they're about to go out of business, and we couldn't really understand why. So I really kind of thought we were going to open our own bike shop. So being the nerd that I am, I decided I was just going to go hang out in the bike shop and see if I could determine what was going on in Cycle Path and why were they about to go out of business. So I went in and I hung out for a few days, and what I noticed is like they had no problem with sales. So if we were going to plot this out and look here, this is time and these are dollars. If I looked at their gross sales number, they had plenty of customers coming in and plenty of customers buying stuff. That number was not a problem. So that number, you know, was going up. It was great. Because I know how their cost of goods sold works, because they entered into a business opportunity, I knew their cost of goods sold was staying constant. So I knew that their gross profit number should be following the same trajectory. So that was not the problem with CyclePath. So I was really kind of confused, trying to figure out what was their problem and why were they going out of business? Because it was not a problem of sales. And this gets me to where I'm telling you, 90% of the people in the world do not understand financial statements. They have no idea. And it wasn't until I decided I wanted to order a bike from them that I figured out what the problem was. So I wanted to order an Eddie Merckx frame. If you know who Eddie Merckx is, kudos to you and bonus points. But I want an Eddie Merckx carbon frame, and I wanted it built up with campy components. So I go in and I tell the manager there, now please keep in mind it's an out-of-town owner, and they've got a lot of people in this store who know a lot about bicycles. But I went in and I was like, hey, okay, here's this frame. I want to order this frame. I want this Eddie Merckx frame, blah, 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 and this is how I want it built up. And the manager looked at me and said, that is awesome. I will sell that to you at 10% above cost. And when he said that, it was like, drop the mic. I know what's wrong. Somebody tell me what was wrong.
Needed to charge more?
He did. Why did he need to charge more?
10% doesn't really cost a lot of your other costs.
That's it. He had no concept of what overhead really cost. No concept. And he didn't have to pay those bills, so it wasn't in front of him. Why should he? He knew that his incentive was to make sales go up. And a good way to make sales go up is to sell stuff for really cheap, right? But if you're selling stuff for really cheap, while sales might be going up, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have enough money on hand to pay your overhead expenses. So for example here, if we just made up some numbers for rent, let's just say we have $5 for rent, $2 for utilities, $1 for insurance, $1 for payroll, and then we had $1 here. Let's just say, if we did that, then our total expenses here was $7, $8, $9, $10 for a total. Gross profit minus that $10 meant that I had $15 in profit. But if I had sold my rocking chair for 10% above cost, 10% is $2.50. That would mean I was selling it for $27.50. $27.50 minus $25 meant that I would have $2.50 in gross profit, which is not anywhere near enough to cover $10 in operating expenses. Making sense? So I knew immediately what the problem was, and I knew immediately that they were going to go out of business. And when I say that 90% of people don't understand financial statements, that also includes entrepreneurs. I can't tell you how many of them really cannot look at financial statements or truly understand how they work, or how to manage money, or how to do some of the really important ratios, or look at some of the really important ratios to make sure that they're going to tell the story the way they want to tell it. So that being said, there's a few ratios that you guys need to think about. And I put those in your slides, and they'll also be on the review, but they're from your book. And one of the first things you need to know about is, you need to know about your gross profit. And your gross profit is just what I said. It's going to be your gross sales minus your cost of goods sold. It is that number right there. You also need to know it as a percent, and that is in your thing. But here, that's a really important number. And as we start to look at that, the reason it's important is because this is going to help us determine what retail should be. If you had stayed in class, we would have had a more in-depth final project. So your Excel sheet was a gimme, and you're so welcome for that. But if we'd stayed in class, we would have gone through and you guys would have had to determine some things. And what we know is you need to know also your markup percentage. And your markup percentage is equal to retail minus the cost of goods sold over your cost to produce it of 1. So it's your sale price minus the cost of goods sold for 1 divided by cost of goods sold is your markup percentage. And it is important that you maintain a markup percentage that produces enough gross profit to be able to pay all of your overhead. It's super important. And I hear, especially with college students all the time, so when you go through this project, they'll start to determine the sale price for whatever product they're going to sell. And they'll say, oh, I decided to sell my rocking chair for 10% above cost. And I'm like, why did you do that? Well, because I thought that was cheap and people would buy it. That answer is wrong every time. Every time. Because if you make the psychopath mistake, and it is a true story, if you make the psychopath mistake, you're going to go out of business. You have to know what your markup percentage needs to be to always cover your operating expenses. Always. And that is one of the factors, the main factor that should go into setting your retail price. It's got to be very scientific. Most people don't think it is, but it is. And if you don't believe it's scientific, then let's think about it in a real world example. Most businesses don't change their prices often. It's usually like a once a year thing. So once a year, we'll see your rent goes up, for example. It'll go up. And the reason your rent goes up is typically because your landlord's costs went up. So they're trying to adjust the market percentage to cover their costs. Another thing, so this year's Air Jordans are going to be more expensive than last year's Air Jordans. There's inflation, cost of living, costs are higher. So we try to cover those costs. Most businesses know their market percentage, but only change the price sporadically. However, there is one industry out there that has mastered the art, absolutely mastered the art of market percentage. And they're going to maintain their market percentage no matter what. And we let them. The price fluctuates all the time, and we keep buying it. Can you think of what industry that is? What price fluctuates all the time in stuff that you buy?
Gas?
Gas. Yes. The petroleum industry. The petroleum industry knows what their market percentage is going to be. And based on the cost of a barrel of oil, your gas prices will go up and down and up and down and up and down because they're maintaining their market percentage. And it's a shame that gas is so cheap right now because we can't go anywhere. That just makes me so mad. I'm like, gas is so cheap. I could be going everywhere, but we can't do anything. So that's a little bit frustrating. So does that make sense, guys? Everybody following me so far? Awesome. Okay. So we're going to sit here and start looking at income statements. Remember, income statements you need to compare them to something. So we're going to try to look at them on an ongoing basis. Oops. And let's look at it in terms of time. And this is kind of how it tells us a story. So if this is our 12 months here, and these are our sales dollars, let's say that's January, February, March, April, keep going all the way to, let's make that August and let's make that December. I know that if I plot out my gross sales from Velo City it would look something like this. January would be pretty good. February would fall off. March and April and the summer months would pick up. August would be up here. Crazy good. September, pretty good. I'd fall down in November, and then I'd have a little bump in December. And that's really what the sales look like for a bike shop in a college town. So what this means for me is I need to start to tell my story. And what my story is that like, oh, look, my story tells me I sell a lot in the month of August. And if I want to maximize everything in August and sell as much as I can, then I'm going to need to order inventory in June so that I'm prepared for August. But if I'm not looking at my story, I have no idea. And I don't want to be slammed in August and have a lot of people come in and try to buy stuff and not have anything to sell them. But if I'm not reading my story, I don't know that. I also don't want to think that I'm selling bicycles. I don't want to make the mistake of thinking that Christmas was going to be my biggest time. And intuitively, if you're not looking at your story or reading your story, you may think, oh yeah, they have a big Christmas. Everybody buys like bikes at Christmas. But the truth is they don't, not from a local bike shop. People buy bikes for their kids, and people don't buy expensive bikes for their kids. People buy Walmart bikes, Academy bikes. They're the ones who do a lot of bike business at Christmas. It's not the local bike shop. So I would have made the mistake of thinking, oh my gosh, I need to order a lot of inventory for Christmas, and then I can count on all these sales and bring in employees to be ready for it. And then I would have lost a lot of money because that's not the way the business works. So that's one reason you need to be able to read your story. Another reason that you need to be able to read your story is this is going to determine how much cash I have on hand, gross sales. So let's go back and look at the income statement for just a second. And let's think about this in terms of bookkeeping. So when you read the book, you realize that there are two ways that you can do a bookkeeping system. One is on cash sales. And cash sales means that you pay cash for something the moment that you buy it, all the inventory, everything you do. And when someone buys from you, they're paying you cash for retail. And the truth is, very few people do business like that. Any of you do business like that? We don't. We use credit cards. So we'll go in and we'll use a credit card, which means we go in and buy something and we use a credit card, but no cash exchanged hands, not yet. No cash came from you until you actually paid the credit card bill. And let's just say we go buy the inventory when we went to Home Depot to get all of our wood and nails and stain to build these rocking chairs. We used a credit card there. So we didn't actually spend any money there either. What that means is this whole interaction of like building a rocking chair and selling it could have happened before any cash actually exchanged hands with anybody. And that's called keeping your books on an accrual basis. And that is a very important concept for you to understand, because what that means is when you go through your income statement here, if you're operating on an accrual basis, this doesn't mean, it means you had $15 in profit, but that does not mean you have $15 in the bank at all. Does that make sense? Because this all could have happened on a credit card basis. It's really important to understand this because that is where we will start to introduce one of the other houses, which is called the cash flow statement. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it's really important for you to understand this. Now, let's just say these are our sales. And so when we're plotting out our gross sales right here, that's gross sales, but that is not cash. Not at all. So here's gross sales. What that's probably going to mean is if I sold $20,000 worth of bikes in January, I might not see the cash for that until February. So the cash is going to show up in a delayed pattern, very much delayed. here. So if it shows up here, what this means is, well, I've got some cash now, but here sales were really low. And that low time is going to hit me here. So let's introduce the next house we're going to talk about real quick. And that is the cash flow statement. And the family by the name of Cash lives there. And there's 3 characters that live in this house. There is Mr. Cash in, and that is when we get actual money coming in. There's Mrs. Cash out, because we know the women always spend the money, right? And then there's cash on hand. Cash on hand is never equal to profit or loss. It's not, because of the delay that I just explained to you. Everybody following me with that? Now, this is also a very important concept for you to understand. So let's get back up here and let's talk about operating expenses and overhead. Now, these are things that you have to pay every month, no matter what. And you might not, let's say January, I sold 10,000 bikes, but I didn't get that until that cash until February. Right here in this time frame, I still had to pay rent, I still had to pay utilities, I still had to pay payroll. Because employees don't like say, hey, that's okay. You just pay me my paycheck when cash flow is okay. It's not the way it works. You have to pay it anyway. So it's important to understand how your cash flow works. So if I'd made the mistake of saying, oh, wait, February, look at that. I have a lot of cash on hand and I went and spent it. Then by the time that I got over here to June and July and I had to pay buy a lot of inventory, I wouldn't have had any cash to do it. So you have to be able to manage your cash flow in conjunction with your sales flows, understanding that overhead doesn't change. Now, when you guys watch Shark Tank things, have y'all heard the statement like, oh, you hear Mark Cuban all the time where you say, when are you going to hit break even? Y'all heard that? Okay, let me tell you what that means. Break even is when on your income statement, that number is equal to 0. You have made enough money that month to cover your expenses for that month. Enough in sales to cover all your expenses. That is break even. 0. So the reason that's really important is because until this number is positive and is positive on an ongoing basis, no investor can get paid dividends or get paid back. So paying your investors comes out of this number. Every person who invests in you is going to want to know, when do you think you're going to hit break even? And this is why, because I'm not going to get paid until you hit break even. The next thing you're going to hear them ask is, when do you think you're going to be cash flow positive? Y'all heard that one too? So cash flow positive, that's a big one. And what that means is, at what point will you have accumulated enough in sales, regardless of the sales flow, that you've got enough cash stuck back that you can still pay all of your expenses from month to month and still have a positive cash on hand? When you do that, you are cash flow positive. Now, when we start talking about sources of money, it's really important to understand that. Cash flow positive. Everybody following me? It's a lot to take in. I know, it really is. So we want to be cash flow positive and we want to hit break even. And let's talk about that. We won't talk about the balance sheet yet, but let's talk about this in terms of the life cycle of an industry and a business. So we know that the normal biological life cycle looks like that. So does an industry and a business life cycle. So if we think about this in terms of an industry life cycle, industry refers to all the businesses that exist within a certain industry. Do y'all remember a couple of years ago when it seemed like within a 6-month time frame, Tuscaloosa got like 6 or 7 new pizza places? I mean, it was like they opened up like boom, 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 boom. It was like Little Italy opened, Heat opened, Pyro opened, Post Office Pies opened. Like 6 months right there, it seems like we had like 7 pizza places open. Well, what was going on at that point in the industry, and let's just say pizza industry, is that there were several entrepreneurs who recognized that Tuscaloosa market was demanding pizza places. So they were trying to solve the problem. And so what we see here is, like, if we think about this was 0.0, the beginning of that 6 months, the Tuscaloosa market was saying, we want pizza places. They recognized it, and then we saw growth happen right here in the number of pizza establishments that existed in the market. What happens here is then you get to the top, and so that's growth. Then we're going to hit something called market saturation. And that means that everybody who wants to shop at a pizza place has a pizza place to shop. So you can't grow any more pizza sales. It's maxed out. There's no more sales to grow. This is important for you to understand, because when we talk about looking at gross sales here, and we talk about not only reading our story, but writing our story, we're going to write our story. This is how most people write their story. They write it saying sales are going to do that. Okay, sales never look like that except for a really short time, and that's in this growth time frame. What sales really look like is more of this. It's more representative of this. And what you hope is that if this is your break-even point, you want to be able to keep your sales above it. But if a lot of people in competition enter the market, then that means there's a lot of places for people to shop. And so that means it cuts down your part of the market share, and it may look more like this, and you're not always hitting break even. So unless you do your due diligence and everything that we've talked about in class prior to opening, you can't really write your story. Instead, you become a victim of your environment, and you let your environment write your story. And people who let their environment write their story, when they hit market saturation, have not made plans and do not have enough cash on hand to pay their operating expenses so that they can withstand this little period right here where we hit market saturation and we start having shakeout. And shakeout is defined as when some of the businesses close because they don't have enough money on hand and they can't generate enough sales to stay in business. So we had 6 or 7 pizza places open. We already know that some of those pizza places, we're starting to see them close. Little Italy closed. It just closed. Has it closed since y'all been in town? It's gone. So we're starting to see shakeout in those pizza places. Is that making sense? Good. So you want to write the story and you want to prepare for shakeout. It's going to happen. It's going to happen with everybody. Like I said, and this is in an industry life cycle. We also have a business life cycle. So if we come here and then we call it a business life cycle, it looks exactly the same. Some of the terminology is a little bit different. So for your business, this is going to be your individual business that you open. Over here, this little time frame over here is the startup. And you can think about this timeline as the same thing as, where'd it go? That timeline. Oops, that timeline. So we'll get back over here. So over here, we've got some startup costs. And we've got to pay all these startup costs and do all of our due diligence before we actually open the doors. That's where that one shows up. Then once we actually open the doors, then what we hope for is a huge increase in sales. It's like a learning curve, right? So once you open, you don't have any sales, people find out about you, and then we have some good growth. Oops. Growth right here. Growth in sales. We watch sales go up, and then we know we're going to tap out. We're going to hit our personal market saturation where all the people who are going to shop with us are shopping with us. And we're going to hit that. We need to do some really good forecasting and kind of understand what that number is going to be. So once we hit it, we've got enough cash on hand and we can survive into maturity. I'm going to take that one out. We'll survive into business maturity. And we got enough cash to handle it. The way that we write our story is we do forecasted budgets. A forecasted budget is not as hard as it really sounds. All it is an income statement, and you make a projected income statement for each month for the next year. And you start to think about and you go do some homework. You go to the library and say, industry averages look like this is what sales do in my kind of business. And then you pull a little bit more research and you say, well, okay, well, this is how many of my target market live in my geographic area. And so if there's 100 of them, but my industry research tells me that I could probably count on capturing 20% of the market share, then what that tells me is I'm going to get 20 customers. And industry research tells me that 20 customers are going to spend an average amount of money. This is all so easy. It's all like an IBIS world for you. Then you can plot out a forecasted budget for your year. That's your forecasted sales. If you've done your homework, then you always know your cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold will always reflect sales. So we always know what that is. And then we can do some really good guesses on what our fixed expenses are going to be. And when we do that, then we can start to forecast what we want our business to look like. And that is called writing your story. Once you write your story, this is my forecasted budget. This is my actual income statement and what things look like. Remember we said an income statement is nothing without something to compare it to. Then we start comparing our actual to our budget, and it tells us how we're performing. Money is our great performance measure. How did we do? Did we hit what we forecasted? If not, what do we need to change? Why didn't we hit it? Let's make some changes in our story. Maybe we need to change some of our fixed expenses. Maybe we've got too many employees. Maybe we need to find somewhere with cheaper rent. Maybe we need to get cheaper insurance. We just need to change something so we can increase our bottom line. Or maybe your actual was way better than your projected because you were being conservative and you're an overachiever. Then you realize oh, I'm overperforming. That's good, but that means you just need to go set different goals. That's the difference in someone who writes their own story and then reads it to see how you're performing, and the people who can survive right here when it comes to shakeout. You have to plan for it. So is this making sense for everybody so far? Okay. Not only do you have to plan for the shakeout, but you also have to plan for cash flow. And remember, we said cash comes in delayed. So this might be sales. This is when we get cash. This might be sales. This is when we get cash. So you've got to plan your cash flow statement too to make sure you always have enough money on hand to pay your operating expenses. You can have sales off the charts, but if you're not managing your markup percentage and you don't have a really good handle on what your overhead is, you still might go out of business. And it's crazy when you see people who are like selling a ton go out of business. It just means they had no idea how to read their financial statements, didn't know how to manage their cash, and they didn't write their story and didn't go read it. We good so far? Any questions so far? Okay, good. There's one other financial statement that I want to talk to you guys about, and that is called the balance sheet. Okay, and on the balance sheet, which is one of my favorites, it gives us some different information. This is where we know, this is where we find out how much we're worth, and I like this. The balance sheet has a couple of things on here. It has the asset family. In the asset family, you have current assets and you have fixed assets. Oops. Current assets and fixed assets. The difference is current assets usually turn over in about 30 days. And you can think about that. Your current assets are going to be your cash. It's going to be your inventory. And it's also going to be your accounts receivable. Those all turn over pretty quickly. Your fixed assets is going to consist of your PP&E, which is what we call plants, property, and equipment. That's it. We're going to add the totals of all these up and get total assets. Okay, this is where we get a little bit of interaction between the characters and the houses. And I want you to understand it a little bit better. So here, this, oops, I erased and didn't mean to. Come on, dude. Still learning how to use this virtual whiteboard, y'all. Cash on hand is the same thing as this number. So as this number changes, cash in, cash out, we know it's going to change all the time. Whatever cash you have on hand is what shows up right there. Same number. One little interaction. And it changes ongoing. One other interaction we have here is inventory. So remember we said we went to Home Depot and we got $300 in inventory? That $300 doesn't show up on the income statement. That $300 shows up right here as inventory. $300. It costs us $25 to build each rocking chair. So we've got $300 total in inventory or 12 rocking chairs. And that's where it shows up. Now, if we sell one of those rocking chairs, so we know somebody came by and they stopped and bought one of our rocking chairs, we subtract that one out, which means we now have 11 in stock in inventory, which is worth $275 now. But that one rocking chair that we sold has jumped houses. And that one rocking chair is what is showing up right here as your cost of goods sold. So as you sell something, you register it on cost of goods sold, and it reduces out of the inventory that you have on hand. And that's how they interact. Any questions about that so far, everybody? Y'all get that? Okay, good. Well, we sold that rocking chair on credit, didn't we? We did. They used a credit card. And we haven't processed out that credit card with our bank yet, and we sold it for $50. So we've got $50 sitting here in accounts receivable that we're waiting to collect. So once we collect it, it becomes cash. Everybody follow me? If you have any questions, y'all stop me. So here we are with current assets. Your fixed assets, like I said, are PP&E. That's going to be your cars. You're going to be all your equipment that you have. In the bike shop, it was like all of our racks, all of our tools. Everything that we had in there was our fixed assets. Add those up and we'll get a total number. Any questions about assets? So assets are what we own. The next thing on the balance sheet are our liabilities. And that is what we owe. That's what we owe. It's broken down. So we got the assets and the liabilities live together here. Liabilities, there's a couple of kinds of liabilities too. We have short-term liabilities. Those are the ones that we're going to pay off quickly. And then we also have long-term liabilities. Those are usually the ones we pay off over a long amount of time. These are usually loans, like at the bank. Typically, we get loans for our fixed assets. That is known as debt financing. And you learned there was two ways to finance, debt and equity, right? So that's known as debt. A short-term liability is going to be our accounts payable. That's your credit card bill that's sitting there waiting for you to pay it. We add these up and we get total liabilities. At the bottom of this, we will have total assets minus total liabilities is going to give us one of my favorite numbers ever. That's going to tell us how much we're worth. That is our net worth. Also, a nickname for that may be your owner's equity. There. So your net worth. Once this number of net worth exceeds $1 million, you're known as a millionaire. That's it. That's all it takes. But that doesn't mean you have $1 million in your pocket. Not at all. Everybody understand that? It took me a long time to make my 11-year-old understand that millionaires don't walk around with like $1 million in their pocket. Now, for some reason, accountants have to make all this balance and they're going to put what I call some arbitrary number in there and make it all equal 0. I don't even care about that. What I care about is that formula right there, total assets minus total liabilities, and what our net worth is. So any questions about that so far? Okay, good. So now we're going to come back over here and look at this chart here of our business. Here's our business life cycle. And in here, we know now by looking at our financial statements that we're going to need a certain amount of money for startup. We also know that we're going to need some money for what's called working capital. And working capital is the actual cash that we have on hand to pay operating expenses. And we're going to need a reserve for that. The actual, if we looked at it on the balance sheet and the cash on hand, we're going to need that cash to pay operating expenses. I think it's current assets minus current liabilities is the actual formula for working capital. Oops, well, let me write on that for working capital. But what it really means is, do you have enough cash on hand to pay all of your operating expenses? And we know we're going to need that. We know that there is a delay from the time we make a sale till we actually get cash. We also know that there's going to be quite a delay before we're really cash flow positive on an ongoing basis. So we're going to need to get some money from somewhere to help us cover our operating expenses in the form of working capital until we hit that. And for some companies, like it's 2 or 3 years before you get to cash flow positive. So you've got to have a source of cash to pay. We also know that here in the growth, why did that jump? Stop jumping. I'm still learning, y'all, on this. Here we go. We also know that here in the growth part, we may need to add some more assets in to help us grow. We may need to add more equipment. We may need to add lots of different things. So we may need to add some assets here, and we're going to need money for that. And so as we look at all of this, we now see that where we are in the business life cycle is going to determine what type of money we're trying to find. And the type of money that we're trying to find is going to dictate where we go to get that money. Now, in the beginning right here, when we start looking at startup costs prior to opening the doors, it's really hard to get debt financing. It's really hard to get a loan for anything. And the reason you can't is because you don't have any assets, first of all. And second of all, you don't have any proven track record of income. So no bank is going to give you any money at this point. This is the hardest time for any entrepreneur to come up with money. So typically, startup costs here, let me do this. Typically, startup costs, this is why it's the number one place to get money, is going to come from your personal savings or friends and family. Personal savings because you believe in yourself. Friends and family because they trust you without, or they love you without a proven track record that your business is going to succeed. And that's where that money comes from. It's not really going to come from anywhere else. So you have to prepare and write your own story about your personal finances and start saving money now if you think you ever want to open your own business, or have friends and family that believe in you and can fund it. After we open the business, then we start looking here of like, man, we've got to have some money for working capital. Typically, you're going to be at about this point in the business life cycle. So you've started showing sales, you've started showing revenue, and you're starting to show growth. And you've done a really, really good job of doing your homework and doing your projected budgets. And so at this point, we can start looking maybe for some equity financing. And at this point is where you may start looking at angel investing. And angel investors are equity financing. They're going to give you money in exchange for part ownership of your business. It's a good time to ask for angels. Here, we start looking at growth. You've got more of a proven track record, and you've still got the good homework that shows you're going to keep growing. It becomes a little bit easier here for these assets to get debt financing because you've shown you can make money, and that if you get this asset, you can make even more money. It's easier to get a loan from a bank. Also at this point, and that's for assets, you're still going to need more working capital to grow. And this is the point here where you start to bring in venture capitalists. They're going to give you a lot more money than an angel investor, but they're going to require a lot more track record from you and history to show that you're actually doing what you say you're going to do before they will invest in you. So now you can see why, if you're going to go get money to open a business, you've got to do your homework, because you got to know how much to ask for. And then you've got to know what you're going to use it for and what point in your business life cycle you're going to need it, so you know who to ask for it. And then when you start talking to angels and VCs, you've got to have done your homework to know when you're going to hit break even and when you're going to hit cash flow positive, because they're going to want to know, when am I going to make any money off you? Because I didn't give you money because I like you as an investor. I gave you money because I trust you're going to make money and I like to make money. And I want to know when I'm getting it back. Questions? No? All good? So let's summarize real quickly here what we've got. We've got houses where people live. The first one is your startup costs. That's everything before you open. Once we open, then we're going to have a P&L or an income statement. Know all of the nicknames. The people who live in the P&L house are going to be gross sales minus cost of goods sold, going to give us gross profit, minus our operating expenses, gives us our net income. Those all live there. In the balance sheet, we have two families. We have the assets minus the liabilities. And that gives us our net worth. This is where inventory lives. Once we sell something, it shows up as a cost of goods sold and subtracts out from inventory. The other one we have here is our cash flow statement. And inside the cash house, we have cash in, we have cash out, gives us cash on hand. And this cash on hand is the same thing as the cash we see right here. The cash that comes in will reflect these sales, but it will be delayed because we're operating on an accrual basis. We need to be able to predict what all of these are going to look like over the first, second, or third year of our business so that we know when we're going to hit break even. And we also need to know when we're going to be cash flow positive so that we can tell the bank or investors when they're going to be able to get the money back and ensure that they're going to get their money back, plus whatever they want to make off of us. Questions, comments? That's a lot, I know. Did I lose y'all or did y'all stay with me? Somebody talk to me.
I'm with you.
Yeah?
I'm with
Okay.
you.
That's accounting 210 in 50 minutes without double entry bookkeeping. How about that?
Wish I wouldn't have taken it now.
I know what they make you, sorry. But that really is accounting 210 in 50 minutes. That's what you're trying to do. You want to, and this, you know, the bottom line in all of this is, pun intended, because we all want the bottom line to be positive. The bottom line is this, is if you're going to be successful, you need to know how to write your financial story. And then after you write it, you need to be able to read what's actually happening so that you can compare them. And you can make adjustments as you go. Now I'm going to finish up real quickly here. We've got 1 minute by telling you that this pandemic and opening the economy back up is going to be, now that you know you've got information, we're not going to just open the economy and it be the way it was. It's just not. And the reason we're not is because if you think about right here, everything's closed, sales have gone to zero or almost nothing. And when sales go to zero or almost nothing, 2 months later, right here, when we open back up, guess what they don't have coming in? Cash. There's going to be no cash. So the businesses can't open as normal. You can't open and operate as normal if you have no cash on hand. Employees are not going to be called back in the same number because they don't have working capital to pay them. Inventory is not going to be the same because they don't have any cash to order it. I mean, the ripple effects are going to be absurd. But Sun Tzu has written one of the best books ever. It's well over 3,000 years old. And he's one of the first people who wrote a book about strategy, and he wrote it in terms of the military. One of his tenets is that if you want to succeed, you eliminate the element of surprise. And the way you eliminate the element of surprise is by do your due diligence and your homework. You all will not be surprised now when the economy doesn't open back up normally, because you now know how to read financial statements and you can look at it and think about it and be like, no, man, it's not. So what do I do to make sure I write my story the way I want it to happen? You need to be thinking about that, thinking about it in terms of the job market. What are you going to do? Job market's going to be hard when you graduate. But the good news is if you start at the bottom, you got nowhere to go but up. And if you are part of the 10% who can understand financial statements and get the big picture, you're going to excel over the 90% who can't. You're going to anticipate the economy not opening back up as normal. Most people aren't. You can plan. Questions? That's a lot. And it's 12:16. Y'all good? I want y'all to think a lot about this. Okay, I'll have everything posted for you guys on the website on GinaSimpson.online. In your class, I'll save the whiteboard and I'll put the test review there, and then you should have everything else. And I'll also save this Zoom video so you can go back and look at it if you need to. If y'all have any questions, y'all email me, but then you'll have your test on Tuesday, and it'll be a Blackboard test just like you've done all semester, and I'll send y'all an email with your password and all that good stuff, okay? All right, remember, your financial thing assignments due on Tuesday too. Y'all have the best weekend ever. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Catch you on the flip
Thank
side.
you. Have a great day.
Peace out. See ya. Bye.